The headlights cut through the darkness like searchlights, hunting for something lost. Emma Roberts walked along the shoulder of Route 66, her shadow stretching long and thin behind her, cast by the occasional passing truck. 24 years old, she carried everything she owned in a canvas backpack that had seen better days, its straps digging into shoulders that had grown accustomed to carrying weight. Her sneakers, once white, now the color of old concrete, let in every pebble on the road. Each step was a small negotiation with discomfort. She had been walking for 3 hours since leaving Springfield, where a job interview had turned into a humiliation she was still trying to digest. The shop owner had looked at her resume, looked at her hands, looked at her face, and laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine belly laugh that made his coffee cup rattle on his desk. "Sweetheart," he had said, leaning back in his chair until it creaked, "I got 3 certified mechanics with trade school diplomas sitting at home right now because I don't have enough work. You think I'm going to hire someone who learned from YouTube videos and a dead daddy's old truck?" Emma had kept her face neutral, her voice steady even though something inside her chest had cracked a little more. "My father was Pete Roberts. He drove for 30 years without a single accident until someone sabotaged his rig. I've spent 9 years studying that truck, learning every system, every failure point, every quirk and personality of that engine. I can diagnose problems certified mechanics miss because I don't just read codes. I listen." The shop owner had waved his hand dismissively, already looking back at his computer screen. "Come back when you got papers, kid. Come back when you've grown up and got something real to show me." She had left without another word, her $15 in bus fare now committed to a one-way ticket she couldn't reverse. The return trip, 25 miles back to her mother's trailer on the outskirts of Tulsa, would be on foot. It wouldn't be the first time. Last month, she'd walked 30 miles after a parts delivery job fell through. The month before that, 18 miles when a promised mechanic position turned out to be cleaning bathrooms at a truck stop. The night air carried the smell of diesel and distant rain. Somewhere to the west, storm clouds were building, but they were too far away to matter yet. Emma pulled her jacket tighter, though it did little against the November chill. The jacket had been her father's once back when he was younger and thinner. Now it hung on her like a tent, but she wore it anyway because sometimes late at night when she was alone, she could still smell him in the fabric. Motor oil and cheap coffee and the particular scent of a man who worked with his hands. In her pocket, her phone showed 8% battery and 3 missed calls from her mother. She didn't call back. What was there to say that she had failed again? That the world didn't want what she had to offer? That every door she knocked on slammed in her face the moment they saw a young woman instead of a certified tradesman? Her mother, Sarah Roberts, was 62 years old and looked 80. The medical bills had done that. Diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis that made her hands curl like claws. The medications cost $400 a month, and that was with the discount pharmacy 2 towns over. Emma worked 3 jobs to cover it, none of them in her actual field. She cleaned offices at night, washed dishes at a diner on weekends, and did delivery runs for an auto parts store that paid cash under the table. But what she really was, what she had trained herself to become over 9 years of obsessive study and practice, was a mechanic, not just any mechanic. She understood engines the way some people understood music or mathematics. She could hear a misfire and know which cylinder was affected. She could feel a vibration through a steering wheel and diagnose a failing U-joint. She had rebuilt her father's Freightliner from the ground up twice, learning every system until she could close her eyes and visualize the entire mechanical anatomy. None of that mattered to shop owners who wanted certifications and references and insurance bonds she couldn't afford. That's when she saw the traffic cluster ahead, a bright spot of activity in the otherwise empty stretch of highway. The abandoned gas station at mile marker 508 had been closed for years. Emma knew it well. She'd passed it dozens of times walking or catching rides. The owner had died back in 2018, and his kids had fought over the property until it fell into disrepair and foreclosure. Now it stood as a monument to small-town economic decline. Pumps rusted into sculptures, the price signs frozen at $2.47 per gallon from 2016. The main building's windows were broken, the door hanging off one hinge. Graffiti covered the walls, most of it half-hearted declarations of teenage love or crude drawings that hadn't even been done with much enthusiasm. But tonight the station was alive with the glow of headlights and the small white smoke rising from under the hood of an old van parked on the shoulder. A woman sat on the curb, her face hidden in her hands. Even from a distance, Emma could see the way her shoulders shook with quiet crying, the kind of crying people do when they don't want to be heard, when they're trying to keep their grief small and manageable and private. Emma could have kept walking, should have kept walking. She was exhausted, hungry, and desperate to get home before her mother woke and saw that her daughter had returned empty-handed once again. But something about the scene made her feet slow, then stop. Maybe it was the way the woman cried soft and private, exactly like her mother did late at night when she thought Emma was asleep. Maybe it was the memory of her father broken and alone on a mountain pass with no one stopping to help until it was too late. Maybe it was just that Emma Roberts, despite everything the world had done to her, still couldn't walk past someone in trouble. "Ma'am," Emma approached slowly, her voice gentle, non-threatening. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up, and Emma saw a face that had lived through hard seasons. She must have been in her 60s, with gray hair tied in a loose bun that was coming undone, strands falling across her face. She wore clothes made of simple fabric that had faded from many washings, the kind of dress you'd find at a thrift store or a church donation bin. Her sandals were worn almost through at the heels, held together with what looked like duct tape. Her eyes were swollen and red, and there were tear tracks down her weathered cheeks. "Oh, honey," the woman said, her voice carrying a southern accent that stretched vowels and softened consonants, the kind of accent that belonged to small towns and front porches and Sunday church services. "This van just up and quit on me. She's old, the poor thing, but she never done this before. Not once in all the years I've had her." Emma glanced at the van. It was a 1988 Dodge Ram van, the kind with the bubble windows in the back. Rust bloomed along the wheel wells like iron flowers. The paint had faded from what might have once been blue to a color that was no color at all, just the ghost of pigment. The back seat was piled with cardboard boxes that looked like they contained costume jewelry, the cheap kind sold at roadside markets and small-town flea markets. Necklaces made of glass beads, earrings that would turn your ears green, bracelets that jingled when you moved. "Where do you need to get to, ma'am?" The woman wiped her eyes with the corner of her dress, a gesture so familiar it made Emma's chest ache. Her mother did the same thing, used whatever was handy because buying tissues seemed like an unnecessary luxury. "Houston, honey, I got to catch a train at 6 in the morning to San Antonio. My sister's in the hospital there, real sick. The doctors say she might not make it through the week, and I haven't seen her in 5 years. We had a falling out over something so stupid I can't even remember what it was about now. And if I don't make that train, if I don't get there in time, I'll never forgive myself." Her voice broke on the last few words, fresh tears spilling over. Emma checked her watch. It was just past midnight. 6 hours to Houston if the van could run. The train station would be on the east side of the city, probably another 30 minutes from the highway. It would be tight, but possible. She set down her backpack and walked to the front of the vehicle, lifting the hood. The hinges squealed in protest and the hood stick was missing, so she had to prop it open with a piece of wood she found nearby. Her phone's flashlight cast harsh shadows across the engine bay. 5% battery remaining. She worked quickly, methodically, the way her father had taught her. First, assess the situation. Don't make assumptions. Let the machine tell you its story. She placed her palm against the engine block, feeling the residual heat. Still warm, but not hot. That meant it hadn't been sitting here for hours. She listened to the quality of silence that came from within. Not the silence of a seized engine or a thrown rod, but the silence of something not getting what it needed. Fuel pump. She knew it without needing to test further. It was the same problem her father's Freightliner had developed 3 days before his death, back when she was 15, and still believed that knowing how to fix something meant you could prevent it from breaking. She remembered the sound it made when he tried to start it that morning, the labored coughing of an engine that wanted to run, but couldn't get the fuel it needed. She'd helped him replace the pump that day. It had taken them 4 hours working in the yard behind the trailer, her father patient and methodical teaching her not just how to do the work, but why each step mattered. An engine is just a series of small explosions, Emma, he'd told her, his hands black with grease, a cigarette dangling from his lip. Fuel, air, spark. You got all three in the right proportion at the right time, the engine runs. You're missing any one of them, you got nothing but dead weight. The pump is the heart of the fuel system. It fails, the whole thing fails. 3 days later, his brakes had failed on Wolf Creek Pass, and Emma had learned that some things you can't fix no matter how well you understand them. Ma'am, how much gas do you have in the tank? The woman stood up, confused by the question. I'm on reserve, honey. That's why I stopped here. I saw the station and thought I could fill up, but when I pulled in, I saw it was closed. Been closed for a long time by the look of it. Emma looked around. The station was indeed a concrete skeleton, its windows broken, its convenience store gutted by vandals or scavengers. There was a converted shipping container about 50 yards away that apparently served as a snack bar. A hand-painted sign said open 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. An older sign beneath it, faded and peeling, advertised, breakfast burritos $3, coffee $1, cold beer. Behind the container, some scraggly trees struggled for survival in the hard-packed earth. And beyond those, parked like a sleeping dragon in the shadows, a massive Mercedes-Benz truck sat in the darkness. Even from here, Emma could see it was a serious machine. An Actros tractor, probably pulling 25 tons of cargo in the refrigerated trailer behind it. Emma returned her attention to the van. The fuel pump's shot. Without it, the gas can't get from the tank to the engine. It's just sitting there useless. The woman's shoulders sagged and fresh tears began to fall. So that's it, then I'm gonna miss my train. I'm gonna miss seeing my sister. She's gonna die thinking I didn't care enough to come. Her voice broke completely on the last word, dissolving into sobs that shook her whole body. She sat back down on the curb and buried her face in her hands, crying with the kind of desperate grief that comes from accumulated loss, from a lifetime of things falling apart at the worst possible moment. Emma stood there, biting her lip, doing the math she already knew didn't add up. She had $15 in her pocket, not enough to call a tow truck, which would cost at least $100, Not enough to buy a replacement fuel pump, which would run $60 or $70 for a van this old if you could even find one at this hour. Not enough to do anything except maybe buy a meal she was too nauseous to eat. She could leave. She should leave. The smart thing, the sensible thing would be to give the woman whatever comforting words she could manage and then continue on her way. She had her own problems, her own mother waiting at home, her own bills piling up, her own desperate situation that this detour wouldn't help. But the image of her own mother sitting alone on a curb somewhere crying with no one stopping to help wouldn't release its grip on her mind. And there was something else, something her father had taught her that went deeper than mechanics, deeper than fuel pumps and brake lines and compression ratios. You stop for people on the road, Emma, he'd told her once when she was maybe 10 years old. They'd pulled over to help a family with a flat tire, and Emma had complained that they were going to be late for her school thing, some program she can't even remember now. You always stop, because someday that might be you on the side of the road. Someday you might be the one who needs help, and you better hope that whoever drives by has a better heart than you're showing me right now. She'd been ashamed then. She was ashamed now remembering it. Let me try something, Emma heard herself say. She opened her backpack and pulled out her father's Swiss Army knife, the one she'd carried every day for 9 years, like a talisman against forgetting. The wooden handle was worn smooth from handling the grain of the wood, polished by countless hours in her pocket in her hand. Her father's name, Pete, was still visible in the engraving on the side, though the letters had faded. He'd bought it at a truck stop in Montana in 1995, had carried it for 20 years before it passed to her. It wasn't an expensive knife, probably cost $20 new, but it was the last thing he'd had on him when he died, and the highway patrol had given it to her mother, who'd given it to Emma, because she couldn't bear to look at it. Emma opened the van's small tool drawer, hoping to find something useful. There wasn't much. A cheap screwdriver set half the bits missing, a hammer with a cracked handle, a roll of duct tape that had dried out and lost its stick. But there was also a section of used fuel hose, maybe 18 inches long, still pliable enough to work with. She walked to the edge of the station property and found an empty plastic bottle that had once held motor oil. It was dirty, but it would work. She rinsed it out with a little water from her own bottle, shaking it until most of the residue was gone. 20 minutes later, Emma had created something that would have made her father either proud or horrified, she wasn't sure which. She had cut the fuel hose and connected it directly from the tank to the carburetor, bypassing the failed pump entirely. The plastic bottle served as an intermediate reservoir, gravity-feeding fuel to the engine. She'd attached it to the bumper with wire she'd stripped from an old coat hanger she found in the van. It was pure improvisation, mechanical desperation made manifest. It was also dangerous, illegal, and would probably only work for 50 or 60 miles before something else failed. But it was also something her father had taught her, that sometimes the perfect solution isn't available, and you have to make do with what you have. Sometimes you have to choose between doing something imperfect and doing nothing at all. Okay, ma'am, turn the key. The woman climbed into the driver's seat, her hands shaking as she reached for the ignition. She looked at Emma through the windshield, her eyes full of desperate hope and fear of disappointment. She turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, nearly died. The makeshift fuel system struggled to prime itself, air bubbles working their way through the line. Emma held her breath. Then it caught, running rough with occasional misfires, the idle, uneven, and uncertain. But it was running. The woman screamed with joy, a sound so pure and unguarded that it made Emma smile despite her exhaustion. She jumped out of the van and tried to embrace Emma, who stepped back awkwardly, not used to such displays of gratitude. Honey, you're an angel sent from a genuine miracle worker. How much do I owe you? Tell me, and I'll pay it. I don't care what it costs. Emma wiped her hands on her jeans, leaving dark smears of grease and oil. Nothing at all, ma'am. Just drive carefully, okay? This is a temporary fix. When you get to Houston, find a real mechanic, someone with a proper shop. Have them replace the fuel pump. This improvised system will get you there, but that's all it'll do. Don't push it any harder than you have to. The woman opened her purse, a worn leather thing that looked like it might be older than Emma. She pulled out a $50 bill, holding it out with both hands like an offering, like something sacred. Honey, please, you saved my life tonight. You made it possible for me to see my sister. Let me give you something. Emma stepped back farther, shaking her head. It's not necessary, ma'am. Really. You remind me of my mother. She's sick too. I know what it's like to worry about someone, to feel helpless. Go with God, ma'am. Go see your sister. Tell her you love her. That's payment enough. The woman looked at Emma for a long moment, her eyes searching the young woman's face as if trying to memorize every detail, every line and shadow. Then she glanced toward the back of the station, toward the massive Mercedes truck sitting in the shadows beyond the old pumps. Then do me one more favor, honey. The woman's voice had changed slightly, become more focused, more deliberate. That truck over there, it's been parked for 2 days. The driver's a distant cousin of mine, Jack Morrison. Poor man's desperate. His whole livelihood is tied up in that rig. 3 mechanics have already come out here from different shops. None of them could solve the problem. If you could take just a look, even if you can't fix it, it would be a blessing. Maybe you'll see something they missed. Emma followed the woman's gaze to the truck. Even in the darkness, she could see it was a serious machine. A Mercedes-Benz Actros tractor, probably 10 or 12 years old, pulling what looked like a refrigerated trailer. The kind of rig that hauled temperature-sensitive cargo across state lines. Produced pharmaceuticals, anything that needed to stay cold. This wasn't some aging van with a simple fuel pump issue. This was a $500,000 piece of equipment with electronic fuel injection, common rail systems, diagnostic computers that required specialized tools to access ECU modules that spoke in code. This was the kind of truck that required factory-trained technicians with certification and expensive scanners. Every reasonable part of her brain told her to say no. She was exhausted. She wanted to sleep. She wanted to go home. She had already done her good deed for the night, had already spent 20 minutes, and used up her phone's battery on a stranger. She had nothing more to give. But the woman was looking at her with eyes that believed in miracles, eyes that reminded her so much of her mother's eyes when she still had hope back before the medical bills and the collection calls and the slow grinding poverty had worn that hope down to nothing. And there was something else, a curiosity, a professional interest that Emma couldn't quite suppress. 3 mechanics had looked at it and failed. That was unusual. Modern trucks were complex, but they weren't mysterious. They failed in predictable ways. Sensors went bad. Injectors clogged. Computers glitched. But there was always a pattern, always a logic to the failure. Okay, ma'am, Emma heard herself say. I'll take a look, but I can't promise anything. These trucks are complicated. Without the right diagnostic equipment, I might not be able to do much. The woman smiled, and for just a second, Emma thought she saw something flash in those eyes, something sharp and assessing that didn't quite match the helpless crying from before. But then it was gone, and the woman was opening her van door, and pulling out a small, worn notebook, the kind with a marbled cover that sold for $1 at convenience stores. She started writing something down, her handwriting small and precise. Emma didn't notice. She was already walking toward the truck, her mind shifting gears, moving from the simple improvisation of the van to the more complex challenge ahead. Her father's voice echoed in her head like it always did when she approached an engine, like a ghost riding in her pocket. A rushed machine gets nowhere, Emma. Listen first. Feel. Let it tell you what hurts. An engine will always tell you the truth if you know how to hear it. She whispered the phrase softly like a prayer, like a mantra she'd been repeating for 9 years. She didn't know it yet, but the woman in the worn sandals and faded dress was noting every word she said, every gesture she made, every second of this act of kindness. And Emma Roberts' life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Emma stopped 10 feet from the Mercedes-Benz and just looked. The truck was enormous, a beast of chrome and steel, even in its current state of road-worn exhaustion. The cab sat high off the ground, at least 4 feet from the pavement to the step. The grille was massive, designed to protect the radiator from road debris and deer strikes. Even covered in the fine dust of 1,000 miles, even faded and worn, Emma could see this had once been someone's pride. The paint was gray, or had been. Now it was mostly primer and rust spots with patches of the original color hanging on around the door handles and under the mirrors. The chrome stacks were pitted and dull. The tires were worn close to the wear bars. This was a working truck, not a showpiece. A truck that earned its keep, hauling freight across state lines, accumulating miles and scars. In the cab visible through the window, a man was sleeping awkwardly on his side, his body contorted to fit in the sleeper berth behind the seats. His mouth was open, and even from outside, Emma could hear him snoring, a rough rattling sound that spoke of exhaustion or sleep apnea or both. He had several days' worth of beard shadowing his face, and his hair was matted and greasy. Emma knocked on the door, not too hard but firm enough to be heard over his snoring. The man jolted awake with a violent start, his whole body convulsing as consciousness hit him. His hand went immediately to his belt, where Emma could see the handle of a knife in a leather sheath. His eyes were wild for a moment, unfocused, and Emma realized he had been deep in some dream, someplace where he needed to defend himself. When he saw it was just a young woman standing outside his truck, he relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained wary, suspicious. He rubbed his face with both hands, trying to wake up, then pushed open the door. What? His voice came out hoarse, the sound of someone who'd been sleeping in a truck cab for too long, breathing recycled air and diesel fumes. What time is it? Mr. Jack Morrison, Mrs. Santos said you're having trouble with your truck. She asked me to come and take a look. The man pushed the door fully open and climbed down, moving stiffly, favoring his right leg. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders that had started to round with age and hard work. Emma put him somewhere in his 50s. He had a Virgin Mary tattoo on his left arm, faded and stretched with time, the kind of religious ink truckers got at highway tattoo parlors. A scar ran through his right eyebrow, giving him a permanently skeptical expression. He looked Emma up and down, taking in her worn sneakers, her dirty jeans, her oversized jacket, her oil-stained hands. She could see the exact moment he dismissed her, the precise instant when his brain categorized her as not worth his time. She'd seen that look 100 times before, 1,000 times. Adantes. You're a mechanic. The disbelief in his voice was barely disguised. He didn't even try to hide it. Yes, sir. Jack spat on the ground, a gesture of contempt that made Emma's jaw tighten. Mechanic of what bicycles, lawnmowers, kid, you look like you've never even seen an engine this size, let alone fixed one. This is a Mercedes-Benz Actros with a 12.8-liter inline-six diesel engine. You know what that means. You know what common rail fuel injection is. You know what a DEF system does. Emma didn't respond immediately. She'd learned over the years that arguing was pointless. Words didn't convince people. Only results did. Instead, she walked to the passenger side of the cab, climbed up on the step using the grab handle, and opened the door without asking permission. "Hey, what the hell?" Jack started to protest, but Emma was already inside. The smell hit her immediately: stale coffee, old sweat, cigarette smoke, and the particular scent of desperation. The cab was a mess. Fast food wrappers covered the floor, bags from McDonald's and Burger King and Taco Bell, days or weeks old, some with food still inside, going moldy. A sleeping bag was tangled on the passenger seat, stained and torn. Empty energy drink cans rolled around in the footwell, Red Bull and Monster, in some off-brand thing called Extreme Awake. There were cigarette butts in the cup holders. A rosary hung from the mirror, the beads brown with age or dirt. This was the cab of a man who'd been living in his truck for days, maybe weeks. A man who'd run out of options and was sleeping where he worked because he had nowhere else to go. Emma slid into the driver's seat, her boots crunching on wrappers. She adjusted the seat forward so her feet could reach the pedals, then turned the key that was still in the ignition. The engine made a sound that was wrong on a fundamental level. It tried to turn over the starter, engaging with a healthy whir that said the battery was fine, the electrical system functional. But the engine itself caught for half a second, maybe less, then died with a wheeze that sounded almost organic, almost like something in pain, like a living thing trying to breathe and failing. Emma turned the key again, paying attention to every detail of the sound. Same result. Starter good, battery good, but the engine couldn't sustain combustion. It would catch for just a moment, then die. She closed her eyes and placed her palm flat on the dashboard, feeling the vibration through the plastic and metal. This was something her father had taught her, something that sounded like superstition, but wasn't. Every machine vibrates in a particular way. The pattern of vibration tells you what's happening inside, what's working and what's not. Common rail injector, she said, eyes still closed, feeling the pattern. Cylinder 4, solenoid valves blocked or stuck. You've got dirty fuel in the system, probably contaminated diesel from a bad fill-up. The valve's stuck, partially closed, so fuel's not entering the cylinder properly. The engine's trying to run on 5 cylinders, but the ECU is detecting the misfire and shutting it down as a safety measure. Jack had climbed up on the step behind her, breathing hard from the effort. "Oh, yeah. And how do you know that? You read it in tea leaves? You got a crystal ball in that backpack?" Emma opened her eyes and turned to look at him. "I know because my father had a 2003 Freightliner with a Detroit Diesel Series 60. It had the same problem when someone sold him contaminated fuel at a truck stop in New Mexico. The symptoms are identical. The difference is on the Detroit, the injectors were easier to access. You could get to them from the top. On this Mercedes, it's more complicated. They're buried deeper in the engine, but it's the same basic issue." Jack crossed his arms across his chest, his biceps straining against his greasy t-shirt. "3 mechanics have already been here, kid. One from Springfield with a professional diagnostic scanner that costs $15,000. Showed up in a truck that probably cost more than my rig. One from Tulsa with 30 years of road experience and certifications covering his whole office wall. And just yesterday, a Mercedes specialist came all the way from Oklahoma City. Factory trained, had a laptop that plugged right into the ECU. None of them could start this beast. And you think you're going to succeed with that starving look and that Swiss Army knife in your pocket. Emma felt the familiar burn of anger rising in her chest, hot and acidic. But she swallowed it down, forced it back into the dark place where she kept all her rage at the world's unfairness. Getting angry would prove nothing except that she was young and inexperienced and easily provoked, exactly what Jack already believed about her. I can try, she said, her voice level controlled. Or you can sit here and rot with your cargo until it spoils and you lose whatever contract you're hauling under. Your choice, Mr. Morrison. For a second, Jack's hand twitched toward his belt, toward the knife, and Emma thought he might actually try to hit her or throw her out of the cab. But then a voice cut through the tension, calm and steady. Jack, have some coffee and let the girl work. Mrs. Santos had appeared beside the truck, moving quietly despite her age. She was carrying two steaming cups, styrofoam with plastic lids, the kind you get from gas stations or truck stops. She must have walked to the container snack bar, which apparently had opened early, or maybe she'd convinced someone to open for her. She handed one cup to Jack, who took it reflexively and kept the other for herself. She's got good hands, Jack. I watched her work on my van. Didn't complain, didn't ask for money, just fixed it and sent me on my way. Give her a chance. What do you got to lose that you haven't already lost? Jack looked at the older woman, then at Emma, then at his coffee. He blew on it, took a careful sip, then stepped back from the cab. Fine, but don't blame me when you make it worse. And don't touch anything you don't understand. This truck's worth more than you'll make in 5 years. Emma didn't respond to that. She climbed out of the driver's seat and walked around to the front of the truck. I'll need tools. Do you have a toolbox? Jack walked to the side of the truck and opened a large compartment, revealing an arsenal that would have made a professional mechanic jealous. Wrenches of every conceivable size, organized by metric and standard in foam-lined drawers. Socket sets from 8 millimeters to 36 millimeters. Specialty tools for fuel systems, for electrical work, for body repair. Pliers, cutters, crimpers. A multimeter that looked brand new. A torque wrench that probably cost $300. Even a set of professional diesel diagnostic tools, electronic gauges and pressure testers. Your father teach you to use all this? Jack asked, his tone still skeptical, but slightly less hostile. Maybe the coffee was helping, or maybe Mrs. Santos's words had gotten through to him. My father taught me to listen, Emma replied, already selecting what she needed. The tools are just translation. They let me talk to the engine, but the engine does the talking first. She selected a set of metric wrenches, some socket extensions, and a small pry bar. She also took the multimeter, even though she probably wouldn't need it. Better to have it and not need it than the reverse. She climbed up and leaned into the engine bay, her phone's flashlight now down to 2% battery. She worked quickly, methodically, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she located the fuel rail and began tracing the lines to the individual injectors. The Mercedes engine was a masterpiece of German engineering, but it was also complex to the point of absurdity. Everything was packed tight, every inch of space utilized. To access the injectors, you had to remove half a dozen other components first. Wiring harnesses, coolant lines, the intake manifold cover. But Emma had studied engines like this, had downloaded service manuals, and watched hours of video from professional mechanics, had taken apart the Detroit diesel in her father's Freightliner until she could reassemble it blindfolded. Mrs. Santos sat on a nearby concrete block that had probably once been part of the station's foundation. She sipped her coffee and watched Emma work, her eyes sharp and focused. After a few minutes of silence, she spoke. "Where'd you learn all this, honey, about engines? You go to trade school." Emma's voice came muffled from under the hood, her head and shoulders buried in the engine compartment. "From my father, Pete Roberts. He was a trucker, had a yellow Freightliner he called Titanic. Said it was unsinkable like the ship, but without the iceberg." Was Mrs. Santos's voice was gentle, careful, past tense. Emma stopped moving for just a second, her hands still on a wiring connector, then continued working. "He died 9 years ago. I was 15. "I'm sorry, honey. That's too young to lose a father. What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Emma's hands kept working, removing bolts, setting them carefully aside where she wouldn't lose them. But her voice changed, became flatter, more distant, like she was reporting facts about someone else's life. "Wolf Creek Pass, it's in Colorado between Pagosa Springs and South Fork. The descent is 6% grade for about 6 miles. Every trucker knows it. Every trucker fears it. The brakes failed on the way down. He was hauling 20 tons of steel beams, and the brakes just gave out." Mrs. Santos made the sign of the cross, a quick Catholic gesture Emma recognized from her own childhood, back when her mother still went to church. Jack, who'd been leaning against the trailer, lowered his head. Every trucker knew Wolf Creek Pass. Every trucker knew someone who died there or almost died there, or had a story about their brakes smoking and barely making it down alive. "My father tried to throw the truck against the guardrail to slow it down." Emma continued, her voice still flat and distant. "He didn't want to hit any cars. There were families on that road, people coming back from ski trips with their kids. He chose the guardrail instead. But the truck was too heavy, going too fast. It broke through and flipped, rolled 3 times before it came to rest. The cab was crushed, almost flat. He died on impact. The cop said he probably didn't suffer. I don't know if that's true or if they just say that to make people feel better." She paused, pulled herself out of the engine compartment, wiped her hands on her already filthy jeans. Her face was streaked with grease now, and there was a smudge of oil across her forehead where she'd unconsciously pushed her hair back. "After he died," Emma continued, looking at neither of them, her eyes focused on some middle distance. "My mother wanted to sell the Titanic for scrap. She was going to get maybe $3,000 for it, but I wouldn't let her. I was 15 years old and I threw a fit like a little kid, screaming and crying and threatening to run away. I made her promise to keep it in our yard, and I spent the last 9 years trying to fix that truck." She looked at Jack now, directly, her eyes hard. "I taught myself everything. Bought service manuals with money from my part-time jobs. Watched YouTube videos until 3 in the morning. Hung around garages asking mechanics questions until they got tired of me and told me to go away. Some of them were nice about it. Most weren't. But I learned. I tore that engine down to the block and built it back up. Twice. I replaced every seal, every gasket, every bearing. I rebuilt the transmission from the ground up. I rewired the entire electrical system. I can name every component in that truck and tell you what it does and how it fails." She emerged fully from under the hood, now holding a small component in her hand about the size of a cigarette lighter. And you know what I discovered when I finally got it running again? You know what I found buried in the service records that the police never bothered to look at? Jack shook his head, caught up in the story despite himself. My father died because the garage that serviced his truck a week before the accident did a rush job. They changed the brake pads because they were worn, but they didn't purge the hydraulic system properly after they did it. There was air left in the lines. They either didn't know they needed to do it, or they didn't care, or they were too busy. I'll never know which, but I found the invoice. I found the mechanic's signature. I found the notation that said brake pads replaced and nothing about bleeding the lines or checking for air. Emma came fully out from under the hood, now her eyes bright with unshed tears and old anger. On a level road with careful braking, the air bubbles didn't matter much. The brakes worked okay, not great, but okay. But on the first serious descent with sustained heavy braking, the bubbles compressed instead of the fluid. The pedal went to the floor. And my father died because someone was in a hurry, because someone didn't do their job right, because someone treated a truck like just another ticket to punch instead of a machine that a man's life depended on. She looked directly at Jack, her voice intense now, passionate. That's why I don't trust rushed mechanics, Mr. Morrison. That's why I take my time. My father used to say a rushed machine gets nowhere. That was the last thing he taught me the last morning I saw him alive. He said it every time he did maintenance, every time he changed oil, or checked the brakes, or adjusted the clutch. He said an engine is like people. You need patience. You need to listen. You need to feel. If you treat the machine like an enemy, it becomes your enemy. If you treat it with respect, it respects you back. Mrs. Santos was writing something in her notebook again, her hand moving quickly across the page. Emma didn't notice. She was already returning to the engine this time, holding a large veterinary syringe that Mrs. Santos had apparently pulled from her van while Emma was talking. "What the hell is that for?" Jack asked, stepping closer despite himself drawn in by curiosity or maybe by Emma's story. "I'm going to inject clean diesel directly into the solenoid valve. Manual cleaning. No scanner, no computer diagnostics, no electronics. Old school. The way my father taught me to fix things when you don't have fancy equipment. When all you have is knowledge and hands and determination." Jack shook his head slowly, but there was less conviction in his skepticism now. "You're crazy, kid. That won't work. Those valves are precision machined to tolerances measured in microns. You can't just clean them with a syringe like they're a clogged garden hose." Emma didn't answer. She filled the syringe with clean diesel from a jerry can Jack had in the truck's storage compartment, drawing it up carefully, making sure there was no air in the line. Then she carefully inserted the needle into the injector port, found the right angle, and pushed the plunger, slowly forcing diesel under pressure directly into the blocked valve. Once, she could feel resistance, the pressure building against the blockage. Twice. The resistance decreased slightly. The contamination was breaking up, being forced through. 3 times. She could feel it, now could sense the valve beginning to move more freely, the contaminated fuel being flushed out and replaced with clean diesel. She cleaned the excess fuel with a shop rag, checked all her connections, made sure everything was secure. Then she closed the hood and stepped back. "Mr. Morrison, start it." Jack climbed into the cab, his skepticism still written across every line of his weathered face. But there was something else there now, too. A tiny spark of hope that he was trying not to let himself feel, because hope, when it gets crushed, hurts worse than no hope at all. He turned the key. The engine coughed, misfired, caught for a second longer than before, then died. Emma closed her eyes and whispered so quietly that only she could hear it. Come on, big guy, talk to me. Tell me where it hurts. Show me you're ready to run. Jack tried again. The engine rumbled deeper, this time more sustained. It almost caught the cylinders firing in sequence, but then it died again. Mrs. Santos stood up from her concrete block tension, visible in the way she held her coffee cup in the set of her shoulders. Emma climbed up on the step one more time, leaned into the cab. Easy, she said softly, as if talking to the truck itself, as if it were a horse that needed to be calmed. Don't force it. Let it breathe. Let the fuel find its way. Give it time. Jack turned the key for the third time. The Mercedes-Benz Actros engine roared to life like a lion waking from a long sleep. It started strong, the 6 cylinders firing in perfect sequence, the sound deep and powerful and healthy. The idle settled into a smooth rhythm, no misfires, no hesitation. Just the pure mechanical symphony of a diesel engine running the way it was designed to run. Jack yelled in the cab, a sound of pure relief and disbelief mixed together. He revved the engine, listening to it respond, feeling the power come back. He jumped down from the cab and, before Emma could react, grabbed her in a bear hug that lifted her completely off the ground. You're a witch, kid, a genuine witch. I don't know how you did it, but you did it, and I don't even care how. It's running. It's actually running. Emma found herself smiling despite her exhaustion, despite everything. There was something pure about this moment, something that transcended all the rejection and humiliation and struggle. She had fixed something. She had taken a machine that 3 certified mechanics couldn't start, and she had made it run. The celebration lasted less than a minute. Headlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness, approaching fast on Route 66. A white Amarok pickup, brand new and gleaming, even in the dim light, came to a stop with a hard brake that raised dust and scattered gravel across the abandoned station's parking lot. The door opened and a young man got out, moving with the confident stride of someone who'd never been told no in his life. He couldn't have been more than 28, with carefully gelled hair that probably took 20 minutes to style every morning. He wore a Mercedes-Benz polo shirt, the kind with the embroidered logo, the kind that told you this person was officially associated with the brand. Cargo pants with more pockets than any person could reasonably need, each one probably filled with some specialized tool or diagnostic device. And he carried an aluminum briefcase that probably cost more than Jack's monthly mortgage payment, the kind that held precision equipment in foam-lined compartments. He had the posture of someone who'd never been wrong in his life, or at least who'd never admitted it. Jack Morrison, he called out, not even bothering to look at who else was present, his eyes scanning for the truck. I'm Matthew Reed from MB Tech Diagnostics, Mercedes-Benz US. Contracted us to handle this repair. The regional factory sent me personally to fix this vehicle. Where's the broken rig? Jack was still grinning, his arm around M's shoulder in a gesture that was almost paternal. Hey man, we're all good here. Problem solved. This girl's a genius. Engine's running perfect. Matthew stopped walking and finally looked at Emma properly, really seeing her for the first time. His eyes traveled from her worn sneakers held together with duct tape and prayer, up her dirt-stained jeans that were 2 sizes too big and held up with a belt that had extra holes punched in it, over her oversized jacket that swallowed her thin frame, to her oil-stained hands, her grease-smeared face, her hair that hadn't been washed in days. Emma watched his expression shift from professional courtesy to open contempt in the space of a heartbeat. She'd seen this look before, seen it 1,000 times, but it never stopped hurting. This girl, Matthew's voice dripped with disbelief, with condescension that he didn't even try to hide. Jack, for God's sake, please tell me you didn't actually let some random apprentice play with a $500,000 engine. Please tell me you had more sense than that. Emma felt her stomach tighten, felt that familiar combination of shame and rage that she'd learned to live with but never learned to like. It was always like this. Always. No matter what she did, no matter how competent she was, no matter what she achieved, people just had to look at her to decide she was worth nothing. Young female poor. 3 strikes and you're out before you even step up to the plate. Matthew walked past her without another glance, opened the hood without asking permission, and stuck his hands into the engine bay like he owned it, like the truck was his property, and everyone else was just borrowing it. Good God, he said after a moment, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, performative in its outrage. Who touched this? Everything's out of spec. There are tool marks on the ejector housing, fingerprints on the fuel rail. This is mechanical vandalism. This is someone who watched a YouTube video and thought that made them qualified to work on German precision engineering. Mrs. Santos took a step forward, her voice still soft, but carrying a new edge that Emma hadn't heard before, steel under silk. Sir, the girl fixed it. The engine's running. You can hear it yourself. Listen to that idle, smooth as glass. Matthew didn't even look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence except to wave his hand dismissively. You hear that slightly irregular idle, ma'am? That little skip every fourth beat? This isn't fixed. This is a pathetic Band-Aid that'll last maybe 30 minutes if you're lucky. After that, the whole injection system will seize up completely, and then the damage will be 3 times what it is now. We'll be talking about replacing the entire fuel delivery system. $40,000 minimum. He opened his aluminum briefcase on the hood with a dramatic flourish, revealing equipment that looked like it belonged in a hospital operating room or a NASA laboratory. Colored touchscreen display 8 inches across, high resolution, specialized cables with dozens of different connectors, diagnostic sensors organized with surgical precision in foam-lined compartments, each one labeled and cataloged. A laptop computer that probably cost $3,000, software licenses that probably cost even more. This, Matthew said, holding up a device that looked like something from a science fiction movie, is a Mercedes-Benz factory diagnostic system. It interfaces directly with the ECU, the engine control unit, and reads every error code in real time. It performs virtual compression tests without ever touching the engine. It measures cylinder temperature, fuel pressure, injector timing, and all within tolerances measured in milliseconds and micrograms. This is German technology, the same system they use at the factory in Stuttgart. You're out here playing 19th century mechanic with hand tools and intuition while the world has evolved past you. Emma stood very still, her hands clenched into fists in her pockets, trying not to let the anger and humiliation show on her face. Jack was starting to look uncertain now, doubt creeping into his expression, replacing the relief and gratitude from moments before. But the engine started, Matthew. It's running right now. I can hear it. I can feel it. This girl made it run when nobody else could. Matthew held up one finger to silence him, a gesture so condescending it made Emma's teeth grind. Wait, just wait. Let the equipment do a complete diagnostic scan. Let science and engineering speak instead of wishful thinking and amateur hour guesswork. He connected the scanner to the truck's diagnostic port, hidden under the dashboard on the driver's side. The screen lit up with scrolling lines of code numbers and graphs and charts that meant nothing to Emma, but apparently meant everything to Matthew. He stood there typing on the laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his face set in concentration that looked practiced, performed for maximum effect, like a doctor examining a patient and finding something terrible, something only his trained eyes could see. Another minute of silence. The engine continued to idle rough, but running that slight irregularity that Emma could hear now that he'd pointed it out. Finally, Matthew straightened up and read aloud from the screen, his voice carrying the authority of computer-generated certainty. ECM45 injection module showing critical failure of rail pressure sensor. Code PZ192. Fault classification severe. Recommended action immediate replacement of complete injection control unit. Not just the sensor, the whole unit. It's been compromised by this amateur repair attempt. He looked at Jack, his expression grave, professional, the bearer of bad news who takes no pleasure in it. I have the part at my shop in Tulsa. I can have my crew install it by tomorrow afternoon. Module cost $18,000. Labor $2,500 in rush fee for weekend work another $1,000. Total $21,500. I can have my office send you a formal quote if you want it in writing. Jack's face went white, actually lost color like someone had opened a valve and drained the blood out. $20,000, man. I don't have that kind of money. I don't have half that kind of money. I don't have a tenth of it. Matthew closed the briefcase with a snap that sounded final authoritative like a judge's gavel. Then my friend, your truck stays here until you find it. And I strongly advise against driving in this condition. You risk seizing the entire engine and then you're looking at $100,000 in damage. You could throw a rod, crack the block, destroy the turbocharger. These engines are complicated. When they fail catastrophically. Take my advice. Don't touch that key. Don't start it again. Call your insurance company. See if they'll cover it under mechanical breakdown. Emma couldn't take it anymore. You're lying. The words came out before she could stop them loud and clear in the pre-dawn quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. Matthew's expression shifted from professional concern to something uglier, something that showed beneath the mask. Excuse me. His voice was dangerous, now quiet and controlled. Emma pointed at the scanner at the screen with its scrolling codes and numbers. That code, PZ192, it has nothing to do with the actual engine problem. I looked it up once when I was researching common rail systems. That's a sensor reading error, not a mechanical failure. It's the computer reporting that it can't get an accurate reading from the rail pressure sensor, which could be caused by a dozen different things, most of them minor. Those are two completely different systems. The engine's running because I cleared the solenoid valve blockage. The pressure sensor might be giving a false reading because the ECU was in fault mode, but that's not what was preventing the engine from starting. That's not why 3 mechanics couldn't fix it. Matthew's face hardened into something ugly, the professional mask cracking to show real anger underneath. Oh, really? And what certifications do you have exactly? What makes you qualified to question a Mercedes-Benz factory diagnostic system? Did you get your degree from YouTube University? Did you graduate summa cum laude from Google? Emma took a step forward, her fear overwhelmed by anger. Now by 9 years of accumulated rage at people like this, people who hid behind credentials and equipment and professional arrogance, while real mechanics, people who actually understood engines, got dismissed and ignored. I don't have any certifications. I don't have any degrees, but I know how to listen to an engine. I know how to feel what's wrong. And I know when someone's trying to sell an expensive part that isn't necessary. That code you're showing, it'll probably clear itself once the ECU completes a full diagnostic cycle. Give it 10 minutes of running and scan it again. I bet it's gone. Matthew threw his briefcase on the ground, genuinely angry now. His professional demeanor completely gone. Jack, are you seriously going to believe this little con artist over me, over a Mercedes-Benz USSA, certified technician with 8 years of experience, $25,000 worth of diagnostic equipment sitting right here, and a service center that sent me all the way out here at 4 in the morning because you called desperate yesterday? Jack looked at Emma, then at Matthew, then back at Emma. The doubt on his face was painful to see, physically painful, like watching someone drown. He'd just watched Emma start his engine, had lifted her off the ground in gratitude mere minutes ago. But the man in the polo shirt had papers. He had equipment. He had a company name embroidered on his chest. He had the weight of institutional authority behind him. And Emma was just a 24-year-old girl in dirty clothes who'd learned everything she knew from a dead father and her own desperate determination. Mrs. Santos was still sitting on her concrete block, still writing in her notebook, her hand never stopping. She said nothing, offered no opinion, but her eyes were fixed on Jack's face, watching every micro-expression, every flicker of doubt and hope and fear. A Peugeot 205 pulled up on the far side of the station, its blue and red lights flashing, but no siren. A man in a state trooper uniform got out, maybe 45 years old, with the kind of beer belly that came from too many hours sitting in a patrol car and too many meals from fast food drive-thrus. He had a mustache that had probably been fashionable in 1987 and never updated since. "Mornin'," he called out, his hand resting casually on his belt near his radio. "Everything okay here? Got a call about a commercial vehicle parked on state highway right of way for 2 days. That's a violation of transportation code. Vehicle needs to be moved or I got to call for a tow." Jack explained the situation quickly, his words tumbling over each other, while Matthew stood with his arms crossed, radiating professional confidence and barely concealed contempt. The trooper listened, looked at the truck, looked at the assembled group, heard the engine running. "So it's fixed then. Engine's running. You can get back on the road." Matthew intervened before Jack could answer, stepping forward with the confidence of someone used to being the expert in the room. "Negative, officer. The vehicle has a critical failure in its electronic fuel injection system. It's unsafe to operate on public roads. Running it in this condition poses a danger to the driver and to other motorists." The trooper frowned, his mustache twitching. "But I can hear the engine running. Sounds okay to me." Matthew sighed with exaggerated patience, the kind teachers use with students who just don't get it. "It's running on an improvised repair that will fail catastrophically under load. I'm a certified technician. I can show you the scanner report if you'd like. Computer doesn't lie. It's showing critical faults in the injection system." The trooper shook his head, already losing interest, already thinking about his coffee getting cold in the patrol car. "Listen, I don't know anything about mechanics. That's not my department. But if this gentleman here is certified and says the vehicle's unsafe, I think you'd better follow that recommendation, Mr. Morrison. If something happens on the road after this, after you've been warned by a professional, the liability's all on you. And if someone gets hurt, you're looking at criminal charges, not just civil." Jack closed his eyes and Emma watched her last ally disappear. watched hope drain out of him like oil from a cracked pan. The trooper had been convinced by the uniform, the equipment, the professional presentation. Facts didn't matter in the face of credentials. Truth didn't matter when lies came wrapped in authority. Matthew seized the advantage, moved in for the kill. Jack, I'll tell you what, I'm a reasonable guy. I'll document the truck as mechanically unsound and unsafe for operation until you decide what to do. If you want to take the risk with this girl's backyard repairs, that's your choice. You're a grown man, but when the engine seizes up on the highway, when you're stranded again, or worse, when you have an accident and someone gets hurt, don't come looking for me. Don't say I didn't warn you. I'll have it all documented. Time-stamped scanner reports, photos of the amateur work done to the fuel system, everything you need for the insurance company when they deny your claim. Emma felt the humiliation settle over her like a physical weight, like a blanket soaked in cold water. It pressed down on her shoulders, made her want to curl up and disappear. It was always like this. Always. She could fix the problem. She could prove her competence with results. She could do the impossible. But in the end, there was always someone with papers and nice clothes and a professional smile who came to destroy everything she'd built, every small victory she'd achieved. Jack was visibly torn, his hands opening and closing, his jaw working. Matthew, let me at least test it, okay? Just drive it around the station parking lot. If it runs smooth, if it handles the load okay, then maybe this girl really did fix it. If it dies or runs rough, then you're right, and I'll listen to you. But give me that much. Let me see for myself. Matthew sighed but nodded a magnanimous gesture that said he was humoring a fool. Fine, run your test, but keep it in the station area. Don't take it out on the highway. When it fails, I don't want it blocking traffic. Jack climbed into the cab, his movements slow and deliberate like a man walking to his own execution. He started the engine one more time, listened to it settle into that slightly irregular idle, put it in first gear, released the air brakes with a hiss of compressed air. The Actros began rolling slowly through the abandoned parking lot, its wheels crunching over broken glass and scattered gravel. The engine sounded perfect to Emma's ears. Smooth, strong, no hesitation. The slight irregularity in the idle disappeared under load the way it should. Jack shifted to second gear, then third, accelerating as much as the small space would allow. The truck responded beautifully, power coming on smoothly, the turbo spooling up with a satisfying whistle. Matthew stood with his arms crossed, his face set in stone, watching and waiting. Emma leaned against Mrs. Santos's van, looking at the ground, already planning her walk home in defeat, already imagining the conversation with her mother, where she'd have to explain once again that she'd tried and failed, that the world didn't want what she had to offer. That's when the engine started to misfire. Suddenly, without warning. One skip, then another, the rhythm breaking. The truck lurched, lost power. Jack pressed the accelerator, trying to maintain momentum, but the engine coughed once more like it was choking and then died completely. The Actros rolled to a stop, all its forward momentum gone, sitting dead in the middle of the parking lot. Complete silence. Even the wind seemed to stop. Matthew had a wide smile on his face, now triumphant and vindicated like a prosecutor who'd just gotten a confession. See, what did I tell you, pathetic Band-Aid? 30 minutes. I was generous. It didn't even last 15. He walked to the truck with long, confident strides, opened the hood again, and stuck his hands back into the engine bay, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for because he'd put it there. After a moment, he straightened up his hands, now black with diesel. The valves blocked again. just like I said it would be. Because the problem isn't the valve, Jack. The valve is a symptom, not the cause. The real problem is the injection module sending incorrect signals. The ECU is commanding the solenoid valves incorrectly because the whole system is corrupted. But I'm not going to stand here trying to explain electronic fuel injection engineering to someone who's never studied it, who thinks engines are just metal parts that you clean and they magically work. Emma approached slowly, confused and devastated. She had been certain. She had felt the valve release, had heard the engine start strong and clean. She'd been so sure. What had gone wrong? Mrs. Santos finally stood up from her concrete block, setting her coffee cup down, carefully setting her notebook aside. She walked slowly to the truck, her sandals scuffing on the broken asphalt, and ran her hand over the hood, almost lovingly, like it was a horse that needed to be calmed. Then she looked at Emma, her eyes sharp and focused. "Honey, are you absolutely certain about what you did?" "No doubt in your mind," Emma nodded, but her voice came out small and uncertain, the confidence from before completely gone. "Yes, Mrs. Santos. I cleaned the valve. I felt it release. I heard the engine start. I don't understand what happened." The older woman turned to Matthew, her voice still gentle, but now carrying an undertone of steel that made him pause. "And you, sir, are you absolutely certain of your equipment's diagnosis? No possibility of error." Matthew tapped his briefcase, his confidence absolute. "The scanner doesn't lie, ma'am. A machine has no ego, no agenda. It just reports facts, binary data, ones and zeros, truth." Mrs. Santos was quiet for several seconds, her eyes moving from Emma's devastated face to Matthew's confident smirk, to Jack's desperate confusion, to the trooper's studied indifference. Then she looked at the trooper directly. "Officer, could you take a look under the hood, too, just to be sure everyone's being honest here?" The trooper shrugged clearly, just wanting this whole situation to be over so he could get back to his patrol, get his coffee, finish his shift. "Ma'am, I already told you, I don't know anything about engines. I can barely change my own oil." Mrs. Santos insisted, her voice unchanged but somehow more compelling, harder to refuse. "Then just look. You don't need to understand. Just look with your eyes. Tell me what you see." The trooper, probably just wanting to humor her so he could leave, walked over and peered under the hood over Matthew's shoulder. He saw nothing out of the ordinary to his untrained eyes. Metal and hoses and components that all looked the same to him. That's when Mrs. Santos spoke again, very softly, very deliberately. "Matthew, show everyone your right hand." Matthew's face went red, actual red, blood rushing to his face like he'd been slapped. What What kind of question is that? What does that have to do with anything?" Mrs. Santos repeated, her voice unchanged, still soft but now undeniable. "Show us your hand, your right hand, palm up." The trooper looked at Matthew now with new interest, with the professional suspicion that came from 20 years of dealing with liars. "Sir, show your hand. There's no reason not to unless you got something to hide." Matthew raised his right hand slowly, reluctantly, like a child caught stealing cookies. His fingers were covered in fresh diesel. Not the general grime of working on engines, but fresh fuel, still wet, still gleaming in the growing dawn light. The trooper's eyes narrowed, his hand moving unconsciously toward his belt, toward the radio, and the handcuffs and the authority of the law. "You were touching the engine just now. You told me you were just doing a visual inspection, confirming the diagnosis, but you put your hands in there. I saw you. Why are your fingers wet?" Mrs. Santos pointed at the injector assembly, her finger steady and sure. Emma looked there again, carefully this time. Touch the solenoid valve you cleaned. Tell me what you feel. Emma approached with her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, could feel it in her throat. She reached into the engine bay, found the injector for cylinder 4, and felt the solenoid valve with her fingers. It was blocked again, but the blockage felt different this time. Not the gradual buildup of contamination and dirty fuel, but something more deliberate, more forced. Someone had manually tightened it, turned it past the normal operating position, deliberately jammed it closed. Recently, within the last few minutes. She looked up into Matthew's eyes and saw the truth written there, saw it before he could hide it, saw the flash of panic and calculation. You sabotaged it, she said, her voice shaking not with uncertainty now, but with rage, with 9 years of accumulated anger finding a target. When Jack was driving the test circle, you walked over here. When Jack stopped the truck after it stalled, you came over pretending to inspect it. But you manually blocked the valve again. You made it fail on purpose. You sabotaged my repair so you could sell your expensive part. Matthew exploded, his professional demeanor completely shattered, now replaced by raw aggression. That's a defamatory accusation. That's slander. I'll sue you for every penny you don't have. I'll have your entire family living on the street. You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine, and I'm a certified technician with a spotless record, and you're a nobody. The trooper stepped between them, his hand now definitely on his belt near the handcuffs and the pepper spray. Sir, I saw you with your hands in that engine. I was standing right here, and now I'm seeing diesel on your fingers that wasn't there 2 minutes ago when you first opened the hood. And this lady here, she's been watching this whole time, and she's got no reason to lie. If you deliberately damage this vehicle, that's a criminal offense. That's property damage fraud, false representation. That's a lot of charges. Matthew grabbed his briefcase and ran for the Amarok, his professional composure completely gone, now replaced by panic. You're all crazy. This whole situation is insane. I'm not staying here to be accused by some white trash girl and a bleeding heart old woman and a washed-up trucker. You want to destroy your own engine, Jack. Be my guest, but when it seizes up, when you're stranded on the side of the road with $40,000 in damage, don't come crying to me. He jumped into his truck, the door slamming hard enough to rock the vehicle. The engine roared to life, and he peeled out, raising a cloud of dust and gravel that made everyone turn away and cover their faces. The trooper was already on his radio, calling in the plate number, his voice professional and clipped. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need you to run a plate for me. White Amarok pickup, Oklahoma registration. Possible felony property damage and fraud. Driver fled the scene, headed east on Route 66. Send available units to intercept. He turned back to the assembled group. I'm filing a report on this. I witnessed suspicious behavior in a vehicle fleeing what I now consider a crime scene. This won't just disappear. If he really did what you're saying, if he sabotaged that engine, he's going to face charges. But Emma barely heard him. Mrs. Santos had touched her shoulder gently, her hand warm and surprisingly strong. Honey, she said, her voice kind grandmotherly again, unblock that valve one more time. I think now nobody's going to interfere. Nobody's going to sabotage your work. Show us what you can really do. Emma returned to the engine with shaking hands, her anger slowly transforming into something else, something like hope mixed with determination. She worked carefully, methodically, the way her father had taught her. Removed the connector, injected clean diesel, felt the valve release, Once, twice, 3 times until it moved freely. 10 minutes later, the Actros was running again, this time with no sabotage, no interference, no one working against her. The engine sounded perfect. Not just good, but perfect. Smooth idle, no misfire, no hesitation, like it had just rolled off the factory floor in Stuttgart. Jack tested it, drove circles around the entire station, went up the small access ramp that led to the highway, accelerated hard, hit the brakes, checked every system. Nothing. The engine purred like a contented cat, power coming on smoothly, all 6 cylinders firing in perfect synchronization. He climbed down with tears in his eyes, actual tears streaming down his weathered face, and hugged Emma again, this time more gently, like she was something precious that might break if he held too tight. "Forgive me, kid. Please forgive me. I doubted you. After you fixed it the first time, after you showed me what you could do, I still doubted you when that guy showed up with his fancy equipment and his credentials. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Emma hugged him back, surprised by how good it felt to be believed, to be validated, to have someone acknowledge what she'd done. But the victory was short-lived. Jack climbed back into the cab to check all the dashboard indicators before starting his journey to Houston to make sure everything was functioning properly. That's when he saw it, the red warning light, oil temperature, rising too fast, faster than it should, climbing into the danger zone. He killed the engine immediately and jumped down, moving fast despite his bulk and his bad leg. "Emma, something's wrong. The oil temperature is way too high. It went from normal to danger in like 30 seconds. That's not right." Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet, felt victory turning to ash in her mouth. She ran to the truck and slid underneath on her back, her already filthy clothes getting even dirtier. Her phone was completely dead now, but Jack handed her his flashlight, a big mag light that weighed 2 pounds and could double as a club. She shone it up at the crankcase, at the oil pan, at all the seals and gaskets. What she saw made her stomach drop, made her want to cry or scream or both. Oil was leaking, not a catastrophic gush, not a broken line spraying everywhere, but a steady drip from the crankcase gasket, each drop falling with horrible regularity. Drip, drip, drip. She had Jack start the engine for just a second, just long enough to check the level. The dipstick told the story she didn't want to hear. Critical low, almost no oil, maybe a quart left when the engine needed 15. "When did you last check your oil level?" Emma called out from under the truck, her voice muffled by the metal above her. Jack's boots appeared next to her head, work boots, so worn the steel toe was showing through. "Maybe 3 days ago. I check it every morning before I start driving. It was fine then. Right in the middle of the safe range. I always keep it topped off." "Why?" Emma slid out from underneath her shirt, now completely soaked with oil and road grime, her hair matted with dirt and grease. "Because it's not fine now. The vibration from the engine being blocked for 2 days from trying to start over and over must have loosened the crankcase gasket. Maybe it was already getting old, ready to fail, and the stress just pushed it over the edge. You're losing oil, and if you start this engine and try to drive to Houston, it'll seize solid before you make 30 miles. The friction will generate so much heat that the pistons will weld themselves to the cylinder walls. You'll need a complete engine rebuild, $30,000 minimum." The trooper, who was still there finishing his report, looking forward to the overtime pay this incident was generating, approached them. "So the injector problem is solved, but now there's a different problem." Emma nodded, feeling defeat settling over her again. Yeah, different problem. Worse problem. Jack looked like he might cry again, but not tears of joy this time. How much does a crankcase gasket cost for a truck like this? How much to fix it? Emma knew the answer because she'd priced parts for big rigs when she was trying to restore her father's Freightliner, had spent hours on parts websites and forums learning what things cost and why. The gasket itself is about $400, but the labor is the killer. You need to lift the truck with an industrial hydraulic jack, the kind that can handle 30 tons. Unbolt the entire crankcase, which is like 50 bolts all torqued to specific values. Clean the mating surface perfectly, no contamination. Install the new gasket with specific high-temperature sealant. Wait for the sealant to cure for at least 4 hours. Bolt everything back on with new bolts because you can't reuse the old ones. And then refill with new oil. About 15 quarts for this engine, and you can't use cheap stuff. Has to be synthetic diesel oil, rated for modern emission systems. With parts and labor at a real shop, you're looking at $2,500 minimum. Probably $3,000 if they charge you weekend rates. Jack sat down heavily on the ground, his back against the tire, his head in his hands. He looked broken, defeated, like a man who'd run out of options and strength and hope all at once. I don't have that, Emma. I already told you. I spent what I had paying the other mechanics who fixed nothing. I've got maybe $700 cash in my wallet, and that's supposed to cover food and fuel for the rest of the month. And this load of produce I'm hauling, it's already late. If I don't deliver by noon in Houston, the buyer cancels the contract. That's $18,000 worth of fruit that'll spoil in this heat. I'm finished. The bank is going to take my truck. My wife is going to leave me. I'm 53 years old, and I'm going to lose everything I've worked for my whole life. His voice broke on the last word, and Emma watched this big tattooed trucker start to cry like a child, like a man who'd held it together as long as he could and couldn't hold it anymore. His shoulders shook with sobs he tried to muffle against his hands. It was one of the saddest things Emma had ever seen. She looked at the skies, still dark overhead, but the eastern horizon was starting to show the first gray light of approaching dawn. It had to be close to 4:30, maybe 4:45. Jack had maybe 7.5 hours to make a 6-hour drive, assuming he could leave right now, which he couldn't. The trooper put away his notebook and his pen, this situation clearly beyond what he got paid to deal with. Listen, I need to get back on patrol. My shift ends in 45 minutes, and I'm already way behind on my quota. Good luck to all of you. I hope you figure something out. He got in his Peugeot and drove away, his taillights disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving just 3 people in the abandoned station, Emma, Jack, and Mrs. Santos. Emma walked to Mrs. Santos's old van and opened the back door. Among the boxes of costume jewelry, there were other items that looked like they'd been collected over years of traveling and selling. Old tools, random materials, pieces of furniture, things that Mrs. Santos must have been taking to sell or donate or just hadn't gotten around to throwing away. And there, half hidden under a tarp, was a hydraulic jack, old rusty, the kind that might have been manufactured in the 1970s, but functional. The ram moved when she pumped the handle. Mrs. Santos, can I borrow this jack? I'll bring it back, I promise. Or I'll buy you a new one when I get some money. The older woman stood up and came over, looking at the jack, then at Emma with an expression that was hard to read. Honey, you really think that old thing can lift a truck that size? That truck probably weighs 15 tons just by itself, plus whatever cargo it's carrying. That jack is rated for maybe 5 tons, and that's when it was new. Emma wasn't sure. She really wasn't. But it was the only option available. The only chance. I have to try, ma'am. I can't just walk away. Not now. Jack stood up, wiping his face with his shirt, leaving streaks of tears and dirt. Emma, even if you could somehow lift it, which I don't think you can, you don't have the gasket. You don't have the sealant. You don't have the oil to refill it. You don't have anything. And I can't ask you to do more. You've already done so much. This isn't your problem. This is my mess. I should just call a tow truck and deal with the consequences. Emma knew he was right. Logically, rationally, he was completely right. This was impossible. She couldn't lift a 15-ton truck with a 5-ton jack. She couldn't replace a gasket without having a replacement gasket. She couldn't refill the oil without having oil to refill it with. But Emma Roberts had spent 9 years doing impossible things, had rebuilt a truck from the ground up with no training and no money, had taught herself skills that mechanics with decades of experience didn't have, had survived in a world that didn't want her to succeed. And that's when the craziest idea came to her, an idea so desperate and improvised and unlikely to work that it made the fuel pump bypass look conservative by comparison. Mr. Morrison, she said, her voice steady despite the fear and exhaustion. Do you trust me? Jack looked at her for a long moment, his eyes red from crying, his face showing every one of his 53 years. Then he nodded slowly, deliberately. After everything I've seen tonight, after you fixed what 3 certified mechanics couldn't, yeah, I trust you. I don't know why, but I do. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that trust settle on her shoulders. Then give me 2 hours, just 2 hours. If I can't solve this by then, if I can't make it work, you call a tow truck and take it to the official Mercedes shop in Tulsa. They'll have all the right parts and the right equipment. It'll cost what it was, but at least it'll be done right. She dragged the hydraulic jack to the truck, the metal scraping on the broken asphalt, and positioned it under the chassis where the frame was strongest. The jack was old and stiff, and each pump of the handle took enormous effort, her arms burning with the strain. After 5 minutes, her shoulders were screaming. After 10 minutes, she could barely move her arms. Sweat poured down her face despite the November cold, mixing with the grease and oil already there. But slowly, very slowly, the truck began to rise. An inch, 2 inches, 3. 15 minutes of pure physical labor later, the truck had risen just enough to give her access to the underside. Not high, maybe a foot of clearance, but enough to work. She wedged a thick piece of wood she'd found in the station's debris pile under the frame to secure it a safety measure in case the jack failed. Then she lay on her back and slid her body under the truck into that narrow space between tons of metal and the hard ground. The view was terrifying. If the jack failed, if the wood shifted, if anything went wrong, she would be crushed instantly. 15 tons of truck would come down on her chest, and she'd die the same way ants die, when you step on them, quick but messy. Jack got nervous, his voice tight with fear. Emma, get out from under there. This is way too dangerous. I can't let you risk your life for my truck. If something happens to you, I'll never forgive myself. But Emma didn't come out. She was examining the gasket up close now with Jack's mag light, seeing details she couldn't see from above. The leak was concentrated at one corner of the crankcase near 3 bolts. The rubber gasket material had dried out and cracked in that specific location, probably from age and heat cycling. When the engine vibrated from trying to start while blocked, the crack had widened. She had 2 options: Try to reseal it with some kind of improvised sealant or replace the entire gasket. But she didn't have a new gasket. She didn't have industrial high-temperature sealant rated for diesel engine oil. She didn't have any of the right materials. She had nothing. She slid out from under the truck, her clothes now completely ruined, and went to her backpack. She dumped everything out on the ground. The remnants of her life, an old t-shirt she'd been using as a rag, an empty water bottle, a piece of soap from a motel bathroom, some coins, and her father's Swiss Army knife. She took out the knife and looked at it, really looked at it in the growing dawn light. The wooden handle was smooth from years of handling. Her father's name was still visible in the faded engraving Pete. This was the most precious thing she owned. Not because of its monetary value, which was maybe $20, but because of what it represented. It was the last physical connection to her father. It was the last thing he'd touched before dying. She had carried it for 9 years like a sacred relic, had promised herself she would never lose it, never sell it, never let it go. Mrs. Santos, do you have any kind of strong glue, super glue, epoxy, anything like that? The older woman searched in her van, moving boxes aside, and found a tube of super glue. Half used, probably past its expiration date, but still liquid when she squeezed it. She handed it to Emma without question, without asking what it was for. Emma took the glue. Then she opened her father's knife to the largest blade. It was carbon steel, good and strong, sharp from years of being maintained. She took a breath and made a decision that felt like cutting off a piece of her own history, like amputating a limb to save the body. Emma went back under the truck and started unbolting the 3 bolts at the leaking corner of the crankcase. She removed them carefully, setting them aside where she wouldn't lose them in the dirt. Then she cleaned the surface with her old t-shirt, scraping away the dried rubber residue with the knife blade, cleaning metal until it shone. Then she did something that would have made any certified mechanic have a heart attack or call her insane, or both. She started cutting a thin piece of rubber from the sole of her own right sneaker. The sole was thick rubber, maybe 3/8 of an inch, compressed and dense from miles of walking. She cut carefully, using the knife's sharp blade shaping the rubber to match the contour of the gasket gap. It took almost 10 minutes of careful cutting. Her hands cramped. The knife blade, designed for cutting rope and opening boxes, not for precision rubber work, started to bend under the stress. But slowly, piece by piece, she created a makeshift gasket patch. Jack was lying on the ground outside the truck, his face next to the wheels, watching with an expression that was equal parts awe and horror. Emma, that's never going to hold. Rubber from a sneaker isn't designed for engine oil at 200 degrees. It'll dissolve or melt or catch fire. Emma didn't answer. She was focused on the work, on making this impossible thing possible. She applied the super glue to the rubber piece, coating it evenly, then pressed it against the gasket surface. She held it in place, counting slowly. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. The sun was definitely coming up now. Orange light cutting across the eastern sky, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. It would have been beautiful if Emma had the luxury of noticing. 5 minutes. The glue had hardened, bonding the rubber to the metal. She tested it gently with her finger. It held. She put the 3 bolts back in place and tightened them as hard as she dared, using the socket wrench from Jack's toolbox, putting every ounce of her remaining strength into it. She slid out from under the truck, covered in oil from head to toe, and looked at her father's knife. The blade was bent at the tip from cutting the hard rubber. The edge was dull, chipped in several places. It would probably never be good for much more than opening letters now. She just sacrificed the most precious thing she owned. Mrs. Santos was still watching, still writing in her notebook, her hand moving steadily across the pages. Emma put the damaged knife back in her bag, trying not to think too much about what she'd just done, trying not to feel the loss. She looked at Jack, her body shaking with exhaustion. Now we need oil. The engine's critically low. If you start it like this, even with the leak stopped, it'll seize anyway. We need at least 10 quarts to get it back into the safe range. Jack opened his cargo compartment, the big side door that swung out. Crates of produce filled the space, mostly mangoes and strawberries, their smell sweet and cloying, some already starting to turn in the heat. Under the fruit were jerry cans of reserve diesel, 5-gallon containers that Jack carried for emergencies. I've got diesel for days, he said, his voice heavy with defeat, but no engine oil, not a drop. Emma looked at Mrs. Santos's van, and an idea came to her that made her feel sick with shame even thinking it. Mrs. Santos, when did you last have your oil changed? The older woman thought for a moment, her finger tapping her chin. Last week, honey. Had it done at a quick lube in Phoenix. Should still have about 3 quarts in there, maybe a little less. Emma felt embarrassed to even ask, felt like she was taking advantage of someone who'd already been so kind. Ma'am, I need to drain some of your oil, about 1.5 quart, maybe 2 quarts. Your van will still make it to Houston. The engine can run a little low, but I need it for Jack's truck, or all this work will be for nothing. Mrs. Santos looked at her van, looked at Jack crying on the ground, looked at Emma covered in grease and oil and exhaustion. Then she smiled, and there was something in that smile that Emma couldn't quite read. Do what you need to do, honey. Take what you need. That's what it's there for. Emma fashioned a siphon from a piece of hose she found in the van's tool collection, started it with her mouth, even though the taste of old motor oil made her gag, and carefully drained oil from the van's crankcase into empty plastic bottles she'd collected from the trash pile behind the snack bar. The oil that came out was dark, almost black, contaminated with metal particles and combustion byproducts. Used oil that had seen thousands of miles, but it was still oil and it would still lubricate, and that's all that mattered. She carried the bottles to the truck, climbed up and poured them into the oil reservoir quart by quart, careful not to spill any because every drop mattered. When she finished, she checked the dipstick. It was at the minimum level, barely touching the safe mark, but it was there. Start it, she told Jack, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and oil fumes and fear. Jack climbed into the cab one more time, his movements slow and uncertain. His hands shook as he turned the key. The engine started smooth and strong. Emma lay on the ground one more time, ignoring the pain in her back and shoulders, and looked underneath with a flashlight. No leak. The improvised rubber patch was holding sealed tight by super glue and prayer and desperation. Jack let the engine run for a full minute, watching the gauges checking the oil pressure and temperature. Everything was normal. Everything was perfect. He got out and hugged Emma for the 3rd time that night, and this time he was crying openly, unashamed, tears of gratitude streaming down his face. You saved my life, kid. You saved my family. You saved everything I have in this world. I don't know how to thank you. I don't have words big enough. He pulled out his wallet and took out everything he had, $700 in worn bills, 10s and 20s, and a few 50s money he'd probably been saving for weeks. Take it all. I know it's not enough for what you did not even close, but it's everything I have. Emma took the money and her hand felt heavy, weighted down by more than just paper and ink. She'd sacrificed her father's knife, the most precious thing she owned. She'd risked her life under that truck, one mechanical failure away from being crushed. She drained oil from Mrs. Santos's van, taking from someone who'd already been nothing but kind to her. And $700 seemed like both a fortune and nothing at all. It would pay for her mother's medications for 2 weeks, maybe 3, if she was careful. It would buy groceries. It would keep the power on. But it wouldn't change anything fundamental, wouldn't fix anything broken in her life. Mrs. Santos approached them both moving with that strange combination of frailty and strength. "Jack, you need to go. Your deadline is tight and you've got a long drive ahead. Don't waste the time this girl just bought you." Jack nodded, climbed into the cab one final time and started the engine. Before he pulled away, he leaned out the window, his face serious. "Emma Roberts, you listen to me. You're a genius. A genuine, real genius. I've been driving trucks for 30 years, and I've met a lot of mechanics, and I've never seen anyone with your gift. Never give up on this. Never let the world convince you that you're not good enough. You're gonna go far, kid. I know it." The Actros slowly left the station, tires crunching on gravel, and reached Route 66. Jack shifted up through the gears, the engine responding beautifully, power coming on smooth and strong. The truck accelerated toward Houston, toward the delivery that would save Jack's livelihood, and disappeared into the early morning light. Silence fell over the abandoned station like a blanket. Emma sat down on the curb in the exact spot where she'd first found Mrs. Santos crying what felt like days ago, but had only been a few hours. She looked at her hands, black with oil covered in small cuts from sharp metal edges, nails broken and dirty. She thought about her mother waiting at home, probably awake by now, wondering where Emma was, whether she was safe. She thought about the $700 in her pocket, enough to buy medications for a little while, enough to pay some bills. She thought about her father's knife, now broken and bent, stored in her backpack. She felt hollowed out, exhausted beyond anything physical, empty in a way that went deeper than tiredness. Mrs. Santos sat down beside her on the curb. They stayed there together, two women in the growing dawn light, watching the sun rise over Route 66. Trucks passed, their air horns blaring. Cars sped by, people starting their Monday morning commutes. The world continuing its relentless forward motion, indifferent to the small miracle that had just happened at mile marker 508. After a long silence, Mrs. Santos spoke, and her voice had changed again. It was no longer the crying, frightened voice of a helpless old woman. It was firm, calm, and carried an authority that made Emma look at her properly for the first time in hours. "Emma, can I ask you something? And I want you to think carefully before you answer." Emma looked at her, confused by the change in tone. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Santos pointed at the horizon where Jack's truck had disappeared, where the sun was now fully visible, a burning orange disk climbing into a clear sky. "Why did you do all that? You didn't know Jack. You didn't really know me. You were walking home after being rejected and humiliated, tired, hungry, with no money and no prospects. Why did you stop? Why did you help? Why did you risk your life under that truck? Why did you sacrifice your father's knife? Most people would have kept walking. Most people would have protected themselves first. So why didn't you?" Emma took a long time to answer. The question felt like it went deeper than just tonight, deeper than just Jack's truck and Mrs. Santos's van. It felt like a question about who she was and who she'd chosen to become. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was steady. Because my father died alone on a road, Mrs. Santos, Wolf Creek Pass, on a cold morning in March 9 years ago. And I wasn't there to help him. Nobody was there. He died trying to protect other people, trying not to hit anyone else, and nobody stopped. Nobody helped. The cops said people drove past for almost an hour before someone finally called it in. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of oil across her face. Every time I see someone broken down on the road, every time I see someone in trouble, I think about him. I think about him being alone, being scared, being hurt, and I stop because I wish someone had stopped for my father that day. I stop because maybe if enough people stop for each other, maybe if enough people help instead of walking past, maybe tragedies like his don't have to happen. Maybe we can be better than that. Mrs. Santos wiped away a tear, her own eyes wet now. You're a good person, Emma. A genuinely, truly good person. The world doesn't make many like you anymore. Emma had a tired smile, bitter and sad. Being good doesn't pay bills, Mrs. Santos. Being good doesn't find jobs. Being good doesn't get people out of poverty. I've been good my whole life, and look where it's gotten me. Walking home on Route 66 with $700, that'll be gone in 2 weeks and nothing to show for tomorrow. Mrs. Santos looked at her steadily, her eyes sharp and focused. You really believe that? You really think your goodness is worthless? Emma shrugged, too tired to care anymore, too exhausted to maintain the optimism that had kept her going for 9 years. That's what the world taught me, ma'am. That's what every shop owner who laughed in my face taught me. That's what every door that slammed shut taught me. Good people finish last. Nice guys get walked on. That's just how it is. Mrs. Santos stood up slowly, her joints creaking, and went to her van. She got her purse, a worn leather bag that looked older than Emma, and came back. She sat down again and took a deep breath, like she was about to do something difficult, something she'd been building toward. Emma, I need to tell you something. And you're going to think I'm crazy or a liar or both. You're going to think this is some kind of joke or con, but I need you to listen to every word and believe me when I say it's all true. Emma turned to her, confused and wary. My name isn't just Santos, it's Maria Aparecida dos Santos, and I don't sell costume jewelry at roadside markets. Emma stayed confused, not understanding where this was going. Then what do you do, ma'am? Mrs. Santos pulled out a business card from her purse. Not a hand-scribbled note like before, not something written on a scrap of paper, but a professional printed card. Heavy cardstock, embossed letters, a corporate logo in the corner. She handed it to Emma. Emma read it aloud, her voice uncertain. Maria Aparecida dos Santos, President and Chief Executive Officer, Trans Global Transport and Logistics Corporation. She looked at the card, looked at Mrs. Santos, looked at the simple clothes, the worn sandals that were held together with tape, the old van with the boxes of cheap jewelry. I don't understand. This is a joke, right? Some kind of test. Mrs. Santos shook her head, and her expression was completely serious. Transglobal is the largest independent transport company in the Southwest United States, Emma. We operate in 8 states. We have 3,000 employees, a fleet of 800 trucks, annual revenue of $200 million, and I own it all. Every truck, every warehouse, every employee. It's mine. Emma felt the ground disappear beneath her, felt reality shifting in ways that didn't make sense. How? Why are you? You can't be serious. This can't be real. Mrs. Santos smiled sadly. I'm completely serious, honey. This old van really is mine. I bought it in 1998 when my husband was still alive, and we had just one truck and a dream. We lived in that van for 6 months while we built the business. I never wanted to sell it, even after we got rich, even after we didn't need it anymore. It reminds me of where I came from. She gestured at her clothes, her sandals. These clothes I bought at a thrift store in Phoenix 10 years ago. They're comfortable and they still fit, and I like them. These sandals were a gift from a friend who died of cancer 3 years ago. They're falling apart, but I can't bring myself to throw them away because every time I wear them, I think of her. Emma was processing the information but couldn't make it fit together, couldn't reconcile the crying old woman on the curb with a CEO of a $200 million company. But why? Why were you here dressed like this, pretending to be poor, pretending to be helpless? Because I'm tired, Emma. Mrs. Santos's voice carried the weight of years of disappointments, of betrayals. I'm so tired of fake people. I have 3 children, beautiful kids that I raised and loved and sacrificed for. And you know what they became? They became people who don't work, people who live off the allowances I give them, who are waiting for me today so they can divide up the inheritance and sell everything I built. They've never done an honest day's work in their lives. Her voice got harder, more bitter. I have nephews and cousins and godchildren and relatives I didn't even know existed until I got rich. Everyone calls me asking for money for positions they're not qualified for favors they haven't earned. Everyone wants a piece of what I built, but nobody wants to work for it. Nobody wants to sweat and bleed and sacrifice like I did. Nobody has character anymore, just greed and entitlement. She pointed at her notebook, the one she'd been writing in all night. So 3 months ago, I decided to do a test. I put on these old clothes, got in this old van, and started traveling across the country. I disguised myself as someone poor, someone who needed help. I wanted to see how people would treat me when they thought I had nothing to offer them. I wanted to see if there were still good people left in this world, people who help others without expecting a reward. Emma started trembling, understanding dawning on her like the sunrise, slow and inevitable, and changing everything. And you were the first person in 3 months who helped me without wanting anything in return. Mrs. Santos took Emma's oil-stained hand in hers. The very first. I've crossed 12 states. I've pretended my van broke down in all of them, in big cities and small towns, on highways and back roads. You know how many people stopped 17. You know how many helped me for free without asking for money, first zero. Not one until you. Emma couldn't speak. Her throat was closed, her eyes burning. Everyone else wanted payment up front, Mrs. Santos continued. And when I offered them what I had, which was never much because I was testing them, they got angry. They insulted me. They told me they weren't a charity. They left me there crying. One man actually spit on the ground next to me and called me a waste of his time. She squeezed Emma's hand. But you refused my $50. You told me to go see my sister, to go with God. And then even though you were exhausted and had your own problems, you went to help Jack. And there's more, Emma. There's more you need to know. Emma felt like she was in a dream, like none of this could be real. Jack Morrison isn't my distant cousin. He's one of my senior drivers, been with the company for 12 years. I asked him to pretend his truck was broken and park it here. I told him to call mechanics to test them to see if anyone could actually fix it or if they just try to sell expensive parts. He's been my partner in this test. Emma's world was tilting, everything she thought she knew, rearranging itself. Three mechanics came before you, Mrs. Santos said. All of them certified, all with credentials and fancy equipment. All of them charged Jack $200 or more just for the diagnostic. None of them actually fixed it. One guy before Matthew gave Jack a false diagnosis and tried to sell him a complete fuel injection system replacement for $35,000 for a problem that you solved with a syringe and some clean diesel. She paused, making sure Emma was listening, making sure she understood. Matthew wasn't part of the plan. He really did just show up on his own, probably saw the stranded truck, and smelled money. And I watched him. I watched him sabotage your work. I saw him deliberately block that valve while pretending to inspect it. And I saw you refuse to give up. I saw you figure out what he'd done. I saw you stand up for yourself even when everyone was against you. Mrs. Santos's eyes were intense now, boring into Emma's. And that oil leak at the end, that wasn't planned either. That was real. Life threw you one more test, one more impossible obstacle, and you solved it. You sacrificed your father's knife. You risked your life under that truck with nothing but an old jack between you and being crushed to death. You asked me for oil from my van even though you were embarrassed, and it hurt your pride. You did all of that for a stranger because you can't see someone in trouble and walk away because that's who you are. Tears falling down Emma's face, and she couldn't stop them, couldn't control them. They came in great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Mrs. Santos stood up and pulled Emma to her feet, then hugged her tight like a mother, like family. Let it out, honey. Let it all out. You've been holding it in for 9 years. You've been strong for so long. You're allowed to cry. They stood there embraced in the middle of that abandoned gas station while the sun continued to rise and illuminate everything. The broken pumps, the graffiti-covered walls, the debris and trash and evidence of decay. And also the miracle that had happened here. The moment when goodness was recognized and rewarded. The moment when character mattered more than credentials. After several minutes, Emma managed to breathe again. She wiped her face with her shirt sleeve, smearing oil and tears together in streaks across her cheeks. Mrs. Santos, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to process this. I don't even know if I believe it's real. Mrs. Santos smiled, and there was kindness in that smile and also steel. I'm going to make it very real, honey. Very real, very quickly. Because I'm not just telling you this for fun. I'm telling you because I've made a decision. She opened her purse again and pulled out a manila envelope thick with documents. In this envelope are 3 legal documents, all notarized, all legally binding, all ready to be executed the moment you say yes. She held up one finger. The first document is a deed of ownership for a 5,000 square foot warehouse on Industrial Boulevard in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's a complete automotive garage. 4 hydraulic lifts, electronic diagnostic equipment worth $50,000, air compressors, specialty tools, everything a professional mechanic needs. The building is valued at $320,000, and it's in your name, paid in full. No mortgage, no liens, no debts. It's yours. Emma opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Mrs. Santos held up a second finger. The second document is a bank account opened in your name at First National Bank of Oklahoma. I've transferred $50,000 into it. That's startup capital. That's money to hire employees, to buy parts and supplies, to pay utilities and insurance and everything else you'll need. That's money to do things right, to build something real. Emma fell to her knees on the ground, her legs giving out, unable to support her weight anymore. This isn't real. This can't be happening. People don't do things like this. This doesn't happen in real life. Mrs. Santos knelt beside her, joints creaking but determined. It's real, honey. As real as everything you did tonight. You saved Jack's delivery. You saved his contract. You saved his house from foreclosure, saved his marriage, saved his whole life. And you didn't even know him. You had no reason to help except that it's who you are. Now let me help you. She held up the third document. This is a service contract between your new garage and Transglobal Transport and Logistics. We have 800 trucks that need constant maintenance. Oil changes, brake, work engine, repairs, transmission, rebuilds, all of it. You'll be the official mechanic for our Tulsa region fleet, which is about 200 trucks. Renewable annual contract. Guaranteed minimum revenue of $50,000 per month. That's $600,000 a year, Emma. That's real money. That's a real business. Emma was sobbing so hard she couldn't form words, couldn't think, couldn't process what was happening. Mrs. Santos pulled her into another hug and just held her, letting her cry, letting her release 9 years of accumulated pain and frustration and disappointment. You've earned this, she whispered into Emma's hair. You've earned every bit of it. Not because you fixed some engines, but because you're a good person who refused to let the world make you bitter. You're what I was when I started before I got rich and forgot what mattered. You're who my children should have been but aren't. You're the person I want to give my legacy to. They stayed like that for a long time, long enough for the sun to climb higher, for the temperature to start rising, for the world to fully wake up. Finally, Emma managed to speak, her voice hoarse and broken. Mrs. Santos, I don't know how to thank you. I don't even know where to start. This is too much. It's more than too much. Mrs. Santos pulled back and looked at her directly, her hands on Emma's shoulders. Then start by making me a promise. Just one promise. And that's all the thanks I need. Anything, Emma said. Anything you want. Don't change. Mrs. Santos's voice was firm, almost fierce. Don't let this money change who